views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Thank you for coming.
Thank
Angel.
you for having me.
I'm so excited to try to encapsulate your face for posterity.
I don't think it would be that difficult, but it's a pleasure being here in the studios of one of my favorite Bronx artists, Daniel Halpin. It's an honor.
All right, we'll keep that sparkly spirit for the next hour or so, and we'll be in good shape. So yeah, that's a good, Okay. So just as a teaching pointer at the beginning of the portrait process, the first thing to be aware of is your angle. How's the lighting? What's the position of the face? And then, you work with the model. We find, most commonly a little bit of a three-quarter, a little bit of a twist in the face. So if you're looking this way, just a hair more, your face this way, and yeah, like that, like somewhere in
and
that.
still look at you.
Range.
Keep my eyes on you.
Yep, eyes on me, because I'm not me any longer. I'm the viewer, the endless succession of viewers who are going to be gazing at your visage over the millennia or whatever. So how do you want them to what do you want them to be looking at? What I love, one of the most exciting experiences for me are the Rembrandt self-portraits, because when you have the chance to visit a great museum, often you have one day and it's like a one-way thing. You're just like looking out, you're observing, you're absorbing. Suddenly you see one of these Rembrandt portraits, and it's a two-way. It's a collaboration. He's gazing back at you from all through the centuries, and it's an arresting experience. So anyway, let's see how arresting we can make this experience.
Well, I can only hope when this piece is done, it would have that same effect.
Exactly.
I can stare into future generations to come.
Right. So we start with the oval, which in your case is profound.
So what I want to point out there
yes, sir.
is, how the expressions and your mannerisms as you're creating this piece. You're trying to capture all these characteristics, and it's just fascinating seeing that from my side, because I'm seeing you squinting and you have all these facial expressions, but this is all part of your work. This is how you get that energy out.
And you won't often see me having such serious expressions. I remember I had people think of me as like some kind of goon or whatever, but then without really realizing it, I'm concentrating and I'm staring at and it was pointed out to me years when I was younger.
Every time you squint, I like to think that you're saying, his face is not that wide. Let me just fix it up a bit.
Actually,
kind of getting some type of perspective.
I'm afraid I have to actually have the opposite thought here and widen things a little bit.
As I mentioned before, you know how you have these artists, what do you call those? Caricaturists, whatever you want to call them. And they're on Times Square. I never took the opportunity to have my own likeness being done. So this is my very first time doing it.
Well, hopefully this won't be as much of a caricature.
No, because I trust your art. I'm very familiar with it. And I trust you that...
Okay, well, it's a lot of responsibility. So now I've blocked out, basically my... the dark things that are, the eyes and the eyebrows and the hair and the bottom of the nose. These are the dark with it. You have to always remember that light is coming from above. So we have I talked about this in my episode of the formal lesson of the face. That the occipital or the orbital, I think it's the orbital ridge that you can feel right under your eyebrows, casts a shadow actually into the orbital sockets. And so that's the first area of dark. Out of that protrudes your eyeballs, and then that, but that's a secondary thing. Under the nose is casting a shadow. The upper lip is always darker because it's kind of beveled down. The lower lip sticks out, it's a different shape, and it catches the light. And so we have to, kind of relearn how to see the world. Another thing I like to say is because we learn by association. So children, very young age, you're introduced to an orange, and you're told the name. So from that point on, you have an association with a name, and then you have an association with a taste, and then the experiences that you've had eating the orange. Well, none of that's relevant when you're drawing an orange. What's relevant is how to create a volume, like it looks round, how to blend light, how to use the color in a combination with everything around it. And so that part of it, that's a hard thing to teach. How to get off of your habit of association and just see things in their relationship to each other.
Do you snapshot an expression, or do you kind of compromise throughout the whole thing?
Because I am doing what I was just saying, like being more general in terms of the most obvious things, the pattern of lights and darks, I don't need to, I'm not getting ready to be more specific than that until later. Then, by that point, perhaps I have, we are engaging in a conversation. And by that point, I'll have already noticed a whole range of expressions that you've had. I don't know if I told you the story of my Uncle Louis. So Uncle Louis, I'm doing Uncle Louis's portrait, and he was the talker of the century, so he's going on and on. So finally, at a certain point, I said, okay, I'm, very excited and interested in all you have to say, but I'm working on your mouth right now, and I need it to stop moving. And okay, so he's like, okay. So then I was doing an oil painting, so I'm mixing my paints. I look up, he's fast asleep. As soon as he stopped talking, he was keeping himself awake. He was, an older gentleman. But in any case, a portrait artist is someone who is a good observer. When it gets to that part of the process, then I might ask you, later on, to hold a specific position, or there's a countless number of expressions that you can have. They say
it takes more than 50 muscles to smile.
It's incredible, and we are tuned in. Is going to make a completely different expression. It's fascinating, really. But of course, you don't want to think too much about all this stuff when you're drawing. But again, this I am working in charcoal. I have not added any pastel to this. All the light is done with the eraser. So I started with a tone. I just took the side of my charcoal, rubbed it onto the page, took my rag and rubbed it in, made a tone. The original term back in the early Renaissance was grisaille painting. Have you heard that?
Oh.
Grisaille painting means that they would paint in gray.
Okay.
And block everything out, add color If they were doing your portrait, they would do it like this. This is kind of a traditional thing. And then if it was, you know, the time when oil paint began to be used more widespread, then they would add the oil on top of it. It's really fascinating, the whole early, you know, kind of oil painting history. I love to, you know, learn about that. But it's just the quickest way is with charcoal. I mean, it's easy to put on, it's easy to take off. Right. It's easy to manipulate, and it doesn't leave any kind of a heavy footprint. You can work right on top of it with pastels. Now, you were talking about your involvement with art and your interest, perhaps, in reviving
I used to dabble, and you know, one of my challenges was people. You know, drawing the human body, because you know, I always had an issue with proportion. And, you know, just sitting here, getting my portrait done, you know, it's very exciting. And hopefully one day, you know, I'll have the opportunity to be on that side, you know, of the board, and perhaps do your portrait as good as you've done mine.
That's a nice idea. Cool.
So Danny, I've known you for a while, you know, and I know your work. You know, it's all over the place, and I have the honor of knowing you personally, right? I don't think we ever spoke about how you became into this artist. How did this all start?
Well, I think it's a combination. I mean, I've given it some thought. You know, I think it's the combination really of support from my parents to be a creative fellow or whatever, and I have a theory about why they were as supportive as they were, and I can get into that. And then the combination of that, I wasn't big into sports for whatever reason, so I was always like giving my mother grief and trying to get her to let me stay home from school.
Right.
So then when I stayed home from school, inevitably, my father was going to come home from work and again, you know, encounter his young offspring who's not gone to school. So whether that, you know, how much that played into my life as an artist, I don't know. My two oldest brothers were they were like brainiacs, they were overachievers, and they kind of already fulfilled my parents' need to have successful children. Right. So, you know, I was like off the hook a little bit. There was no pressure on me. You know, I had a natural inclination to paint, to draw, to do something. And so I think everyone has a creative spirit. I just think it gets squelched because we live in a wacky world where there's other priorities for, you know.
I'm pretty sure if I, you know, pursued my artistic talents, if you may, it would improve. I would be a better artist. I went to fashion industries when I was a teenager, and I thought I should design my own stuff, you know, and I thought about I should design my own sneakers, and I've always dreamt of winning a contract with Nike or Adidas, you know, to design my own stuff.
Some of the connection that we have is because you are, you know, a creative, artistic kind of person.
Absolutely. I see a possibility in anything, and I see great potentials in anything. So Daniel, this studio,
yes.
When did you start here?
So I've been here probably like close to 23 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, very, very fortunate.
Seems like the perfect space for you.
Yeah, what I love is when the weather's nice, that I can just take my operation right outside.
Yeah.
I got my little thing in the front, and neighbors, come and hang out with me or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And you got we're facing north here, so that's the best light.
Right.
It's indirect, but it's strong. And
I want to bring up the time you ran into my own brother.
Right. I don't know how we got onto the subject of his brother, but he, we got around to figuring out that he was your brother, which was cool.
And he tells me about it. He's like, hey,
Okay.
I run into this artist. He had his workout. He's on the Grand Concourse. It's busy. It's loud. And what I wanted to say was that you're able to work anywhere.
Oh, yeah.
You could be on the busy Grand Concourse. You can be interrupted by people like my brother and still do the work, and won't get distracted.
No, because I heard a show on WNYC at one point where they were debunking the idea of being able to multitask.
Right.
That's crazy, because that's what I'm doing right now.
Exactly. Right.
For whatever reason. I mean, I know a lot of artists who shy away from working in public or in a situation where you would have these distractions. It's funny, like I could be out there painting and engaged in some intense conversation with somebody.
Right.
At the end of the day, I remember the conversation. I don't remember painting. It's very important for me to engage my sitter. Otherwise, if I'm staring at you and you're staring at me for a length of time, it's going to get ugly.
Like the way I'm staring at you now.
It's not going to be. It's not going to yield the best thing. What's the average day in the life of Angel Hernandez?
Okay.
What was today? What were you up to?
So, our champion of the borough, Ruben Diaz, our borough president, last year he awarded us $183,000 to digitize our collections.
Excellent.
Because it's going through his office and it has to go to the city, you can imagine the paperwork, that's involved. So people see me out in the street, oh, you must love I love everything about my job. But when it comes to the mechanics of it, the behind the scenes, it gets a little technical, it gets a little tricky. I'm crunching numbers, I'm creating budgets so I can start this monumental task, which is scanning over 80,000 photographs in our collection. I also thought about, once the digitization project has commenced, having some type of internship, teaching students how to not only scan, but how to handle these primary documents, these very delicate documents. So there's potential. There's legs, that can grow out of this. Other than that, a day in the life, or what I do at the society, I'm not only, filling out this paperwork, but I do programs in the Bronx community. I do walking tours, I do lectures, I do special events at our two historic houses, Poe Cottage and the Museum of Bronx History.
Yeah.
Poe Cottage is located in a heavily Latino neighborhood.
Poe Cottage is where we first met.
Yes.
If you recall. I think Doc was prevailing upon me to do something about the cottage, and then I had the thought maybe I would do something interior.
Right.
So I needed. So you were the designated tour guide or whatever. Since then, I've done two pieces.
Yes.
I did. Edgar Allan Poe crossing the concourse, and and then I did one piece that was more coming from the perspective of looking past the playground with all the kids playing in there, and then the cottage is there, and the buildings on the concourse. If you build me a time machine, I will go back in a heartbeat.
Oh man, you don't have to tell me twice.
Yeah, right.
My favorite spots historically would be Hunts Point, Mott Haven. The reason why Hunts Point, I'm from Soundview, right across the Bronx River. And we would cross the bridge and hang out in Hunts Point as well. I have many friends down there. And it always had this character for me as this desolate, industrial, it's the place where you don't go after a certain time, right?
Absolutely.
So when I started with the Bronx County Historical Society, one of my tasks, my personal task, was to shed history on those dark places in the South Bronx. And one of them was Hunts Point. As you know, the Bronx River, the Bruckner Expressway serves as this psychological barrier.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks Hunts Point is north of the Bruckner, where all the stores are at.
Yeah.
But no, Hunts Point, the heart of it is below the Bruckner Expressway. So I did this walking tour 7 years ago, and I started at the number 6 train. And after I did my introduction, I said, now we will proceed into Hunts Point. So I'm walking south, I turn south, and everybody's turning north. And I'm like, where are you going? And people are like, but this is Hunts Point. I'm like, no, that's Hunts Point. And that tour was one of my favorite tours.
Yes, is there any chance you would do such a thing again?
Oh, I did one last year.
Okay.
I did one last year, and
do that.
people love it because Hunts Point, has this negative image. You still have a historic house there, on the corner of Lafayette and Fayette, you have the Peter Ho Mansion, which is now the Brightside African Methodist Episcopal Church. That house is still there, that small little Gothic, structure there on the corner. That's part of history. You go all the way down Hunts Point Avenue and you have Drake Park. Drake Park is where Joseph Rodman Drake, very early Bronx poet, writer. In fact, he wrote a very early poem in the 1820s, and it was called The Bronx, inspired by the Bronx River. So he's buried there.
Yeah.
You have the Hunt family, some of the Hunt family buried there. 5-6 years ago, students at PS 48 discovered that there were African slaves buried in the vicinity of Drake Park. And they were buried outside.
Where's Drake Park?
Drake Park, if you take Hunts Point Road all the way down, like a couple of blocks away from the East River, you have this park right in the middle of cement, car dealerships. It's totally drowned out, by everything else surrounding it. Who knows about this? You wouldn't know about it if you, walk past the Bruckner and kind of ventured off into Hunts Point. All you see is cement. You don't see all this type of history. So these walking tours, brings that to life. You have other movies like, Fort Apache. Later on, they had to add in a disclaimer in the beginning to say, oh, this is not a real portrayal of the Bronx. There's been a lot of sensationalism. People still think that Howard Cosell said the Bronx is burning. He never said that. Those words it was never uttered from his mouth. This was all the media. And it's such a sad thing because with all this negative portrayal, the Bronx unfortunately became the poster child for urban decay in America, where other places like Detroit was going through it 3 times as worse. The Bronx has been through this negative image, and there was some difficulty in the Bronx, but things are changing around. Things are happening in the Bronx, and I guess people like myself, people like you, and my friends who take this great pride loving it, it would be better. It's better now, but it would be at its best pretty soon. There's this negative connotation. I'm like, hey, why don't you just come up to the Bronx? For once, after that Yankee game, instead of escaping, back into the city or getting on that Metro North, why don't you go to the Bronx Zoo? Why don't you visit Poe Cottage? Why don't you walk along the Grand Concourse, which happens to have the second highest percentage of Art Deco buildings? So this is why I'm hoping I'm contributing to that, changing that image of the Bronx. I guess we're getting beyond that, but there's still some work to be done.
So, Angel, what are some of your favorite
my
spots?
Pastimes in the Bronx?
Yeah, spots where Angel might be found.
As you know, I have many friends, a lot of friends who are business owners, and besides my usual connoitering around, I visit my friends at the Bronx Beer Hall. Paul and Anthony, those are my guys. And the Bronx Beer Hall opened, 3 years ago. And they opened inside the Arthur Avenue Food Market. and they're part of this beer tradition in the Bronx. You know, in the 1870s, you had this huge German population living in the South Bronx. You know, places like Melrose, Morrisania. And when these Germans came in, they brought their beer brewing traditions.
Gotta love the Germans, man.
You gotta love the Germans.
Everywhere you go, there's a beer. Suddenly, there's
just
a beer
imagine,
tradition.
you know, Third Avenue was littered with these breweries,
I know.
you know, and beer gardens. In fact, our very first borough president, Louis Haffen, was part of the Haffen family. They had the Haffen Brewery on Melrose Avenue. However, within the last 5 years, you had 3 breweries open up. You know, you had the Bronx Brewery opening up in Port Morris. You have the Gun Hill Brewery opening up near Gun Hill Road. Later on, they opened up a tavern in Port Morris. You have Chelsea Brewery, who just moved to 174th Street, 76th rather, near the Cross Bronx Expressway. They've been in Chelsea, the Chelsea neighborhood in Manhattan for years. And they expanded. They actually expanded their operation because of the space they have now. So you have the 3 breweries. You know, you have beer halls, the Bronx Beer Hall on Arthur Avenue. You have the Bronx Draft House, which just opened up last year near Yankee Stadium. You also have distilleries, you know, Port Morris Distillery, where they distill Puerto Rican moonshine called Pitorro. You had Tirado Distillery as well. So you have this beer and wine and spirits tradition happening in the Bronx. And not only are these places, you know, where you can have a nice drink, but this is places where you can socialize, where you can run into other Bronx professionals and kind of talk about the legacy, you know, happening. So yeah, the Bronx Beer Hall happens to be one of my favorite places because Arthur Avenue, the Belmont section, is one of my favorite places. It's the last Little Italy of New York City, you know, so we're getting this shine. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because there's so much more, you know, that has to do with the Bronx. So
for people watching this show, want to learn more about Bronx history, what should they do? So the Bronx County Historical Society, we're located on Bainbridge Avenue, 3309. That's where our research library is. You can call us, 718-881-8900. You can visit us online, bronxhistoricalsociety.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, Twitter. Facebook, it would be the Bronx Historical Society. Twitter would be Bronx History. We're even on Instagram, Bronx Historian. So if there's any questions, you know, and people want to learn about Bronx history or New York history in general, they can just give us a call and we will supply any information they would like. All right. You know, I think we are rounding a bend here in the, so to speak, in this portrait. You know, this part of the process, what I call the highlights, which are the little touches of light that bring, you know, a glow to the portrait, and the accents, which are the dark marks. For that, I'm using a charcoal pencil, a Faber-Castell, speaking of the Germans, soft pit, P-I-T-T charcoal. When I discovered this pencil in Germany, it revolutionized my whole pastel experience. So I'm putting in the dark accents that help to solidify the structure of the portrait, and then the highlights that bring extra glow to the portrait, and that's where we've come to today. In not only an episode of Art and About with Danny Halbin on BronxNet, but a wonderful you know, conversation and a glimpse into the life of a Bronx historian, Angel Hernandez. And tune in, folks. We never know where we're going to go.